So The Celestial Toymaker is one of those serials which has a lot of baggage, going through many different forms before coming out as this peculiar serial which is far more interesting in concept and execution, plus far more interesting for the behind the scenes nightmares which led to the version which was broadcast. It's definitely not a favourite of mine, but if you enjoyed The Massacre having 2 episodes without the Doctor, then you're in for a treat with this one. But enough with teasing you, so let's get on with it. We begin where the arc left off, with the Doctor having become invisible due to some form of attack.
Doctor, you vanished! Do you think this is something to do with the refusion?
You're wrong. This is something far more serious. We're in grave danger. This is some form of attack.
This doesn't last long, however, as by the time they've exited the ship, the Doctor has returned to his normal state. This is where we meet the titular Celestial Toymaker. I admittedly don't have all that much to say about him, as he's kind of a flat character. There's not that much to him. We have a history with the Doctor from before the show.
The last time you were here, I hoped you'd stay long enough for a game. But you had hardly time to turn around.
And very wise I was too, You and your games are quite notorious.
He is an interesting character, but I think that we don't get to see a lot of that interesting part of him in the serial, spending most of it watching the Doctor play the Trilogic game. I also use quotation marks because the Doctor is barely there. He's only a hand for the majority of it. To explain how we get to the Doctor being just a hand, we have to explain the plot. So the Toymaker challenges the trio, splitting them up with the Doctor playing the Trilogic game with the Toymaker, while Stephen and Dodo play several games with the Toymaker's toys, or prisoners potentially. These consist of an obstacle course, a find the correct chair game, a find the object game, get past the dancing floor, and finally we have TARDIS hopscotch. I'll explain these more in detail in a moment, but really there's not a lot to them. I'll explain the Trilogic game first because that basically sums up the entirety of the Doctor's involvement until the end of the serial. So the game is basically the Tower of Hanoi but with another 2 levels, so 10 instead of 8. The Doctor has to move all the pieces in the minimum amount of moves, which is 1023, but Stephen and Dodo must complete all their games before the Doctor does. This gives us our ticking clock, so to speak. The Toymaker will not allow the Doctor to play slowly, but he also changes which stage of the game he's at on several occasions when he thinks the Doctor is playing slowly. He will command the pieces to move to a certain move.
Go for move 152!
It's very odd, but necessary for the plot to wrap itself up at the end. But this is how we come to the Doctor being invisible and not present for 2 episodes. During the game, the Doctor interferes with Stephen and Dodo by telling them something, which the Toymaker disapproves of, so makes him intangible, with the exception of his hand. But the Doctor can still talk, but the Toymaker soon removes the ability as well. I believe this is due to Hartnell's contract ending during part 1, so with John Wiles trying to get rid of him, he didn't renew it. Innes Lloyd would then renew his contract, which began with part 4, but don't quote me on that as I can't find a source which confirms this. But I do know that this was part of a plan by Wiles to try and recast the Doctor with another actor. The hand was actually a stand-in, with the dialogue being pre-recorded. But this does mean that the Toymaker, who brought the Doctor to him because he is bored, is now watching a hand play a 1-person game. I suppose when you're as bored as him, anything will satisfy. The next time the Doctor will be important is in episode 4, so no more on him. Stephen and Dodo, on the other hand, have a lot to do. With all of their games, they don't get a chance to rest. Plus, each of these games brings some very interesting characters. Not interesting in terms of their deep or anything, but they're just odd or peculiar, so they stick in your mind. Game 1 is the obstacle course with 2 clowns, Joey and Clara. It's basically Blind Man's Bluff with a player guiding another player across an obstacle course while being blindfolded. But of course the clowns cheat, with Joey wearing a fake blindfold and then moving the obstacles while Stephen is playing. Stephen does complete the course, which causes a tie, but due to the cheating, Stephen and Dodo force the clowns to play the game again, which leads to their deaths. That's basically everything there is to say about Game 1. There's not much to it. This is partly because this is the first game and that the episode has to introduce everything, which means that there isn't much time for it. Game 2 is the chair game. So there are 7 chairs, with 6 of them being deadly. The winners are the ones to find the chair which isn't deadly. So the supporting cast in this episode are the King, Queen and Knave of Hearts, along with the Joker. The King and Queen being played by the same actors who played Joey and Clara in the previous episode. Campbell Singer and Carmen Silvera, respectively. Now, I earlier mentioned that this serial had a few production problems, so I'll explain why this casting happened when I discuss that. But these 4 characters are quite interesting, perhaps more so than the Toymaker himself. They're given a lot of time to talk with Stephen and Dodo, which gives us a sense of their dynamics and personality. But the most interesting thing about them is that they may be real people, trapped by the Toymaker. Now, this isn't confirmed and Stephen believes it to be a ploy to win, but there is the idea presented that the Toymaker has played games with other people, who when they lost became trapped as his toys. Obviously what he'll do with the trio if they lose. It's unfortunate that this isn't confirmed within the serial, which could have been an interesting thing for Stephen to realise that he was wrong in the end and perhaps have some regret for what he did. The chairs are in 2 different rooms, one of which contains a series of TARDIS-shaped cupboards, with 2 of them containing dolls which can be used to test the chairs, while the other contains 3 dancers. They'll be important later. The dolls get split up between them due to the playing card characters finding out about them. I'll do a quick fire of the chairs. So the card characters use a doll to test chair 7, which vibrates it to death. Stephen and Dodo use a doll on chair 3, which electrocutes it. Then they test chair 1, which spins it to death. Then the final doll is used by the playing card characters, which just fades away with the chair. With no dolls left, this leaves the characters with a problem, in which they now have to test the chairs themselves. Dodo decides to risk it by sitting in chair 2, which is the freezing chair, but Stephen saves her before she freezes to death. The King and Queen plan to use the Joker, but he realises what they're planning and so runs away, with the Knave following him. With no other options, the King and Queen sit on chair 6 together, which crushes them, so Stephen and Dodo win, heading to the next room to face the next game. Now this is where we need to bring up the obvious. Episode 2 is the one which features a racist phrase. Now given the internet these days, even in quotation marks, I'm not risking saying it, nor will I risk the King saying it. But I will say that it is the M-word. Now despite the actual purpose and meaning of the word, I do want to contextualise it. The King says it in rhyme, eeny meeny miny mo. This being to select a chair. So back in the day, of course, the most common version used was the version with this word. The script did not specify which version was needed, with it being the actor himself to select that version, as it was the version most commonly used at the time. I'm by no means excusing it, but I want to give it its proper context for its use in the serial, as I often hear people say either the Doctor said it or called someone it. Now for episode 3. So game 3 is nothing too special, barely being a game really. It's just a game of finding the key in a kitchen which is inhabited by Sergeant Rugg and Mrs. Wiggs, played by Campbell Singer and Carmen Silver, respectively. There's also a kitchen boy, played by Peter Stevens, who also played the Knave of Hearts. There's not much to this. Sergeant Rugg and Mrs. Wiggs don't get along, so end up fighting in the kitchen, which allows Stephen and Dodo to find the key and escape to the dancing floor. But the Toymaker gives these two another chance, sending them after Stephen and Dodo. The dancers from episode 2 are on the floor, with them dancing to music, not allowing anyone to pass. But Stephen and Dodo do manage to pass, leaving Rugg and Wiggs trapped for eternity. There's only one game left, TARDIS Hopscotch, in which Stephen and Dodo face a character who infringes on copyright, I mean Cyril. Okay, so I'll explain this. The character is called Cyril, but the actor Peter Stevens ad-libbed the line,
known to my friends as Billy.
Combining this with his general look resembling the character of Billy Bunter, this created a problem with the BBC infringing on the Frank Richards estate, who had created the character. In response, the BBC had to apologise during the credits of the following episode. So with that sorted, the actual game. It's not that exciting. Each player rolls a die and then moves the number of spaces, with the winner being the first to reach the TARDIS. But when a player lands on certain spaces, they have to perform a random task, which can include moving forwards, backwards, or skipping a turn. The only thing of interest is that we get to see Dodo's compassionate side. This is when Cyril has seemingly injured himself. Dodo wants to make sure he's okay, but it was a trick, and so Dodo is forced to return to the beginning of the game, although due to the game ending, this doesn't happen. I like this side of Dodo. It goes well with Stephen's more sceptical side, which is on full display in a lot of this serial. The game ends with Cyril falling to his death when he slips on some slippery powder he'd laid as a trap. Admittedly, this isn't made very clear due to the bad framing of the powder being laid, with the powder being almost entirely off screen. Now, despite this victory, given the opponent is dead, Dodo decides to continue to play until she wins by the rules out of concern that she could be punished for cheating. I do quite like this, as it shows a bit of growth on her part within the serial, being a bit less reckless than she was before and spending a moment to think things through a bit. Ironically, Stephen is fine with storming ahead now that Cyril is dead. A bit different to the caution he has portrayed so far. This is a bit of an interesting flip of their traits. This is when, having been given back his physical form, the Doctor returns, reuniting with Stephen and Dodo.
Well done, my boy.
Doctor!
Yes, I'm back with you.
There isn't much to say about their escape, mostly because it's very brief and quite silly. So the Doctor has played to the penultimate move of the Trilogic game, 1022. But if the Doctor makes the final move to win the game, then the Toymaker's world will be destroyed, taking the Doctor and co with it. Because of this, the trio do try to escape, but the Toymaker doesn't allow it, forcing the Doctor to try and finish the Trilogic game through voice command. But this of course doesn't work, so we get this.
Go from move 1023. Master switch.
Yes, the Doctor perfectly mimics the Toymaker's voice to make the move, allowing them to escape. I have to admit that this is probably the stupidest ending to a serial in the show so far. It's certainly a cool way to escape, but the Doctor being able to perfectly mimic someone else's voice without any setup kind of ruins the ending. Plus, just the way it's shot doesn't help. Looks kind of stupid with the Toymaker just standing there as he is about to be destroyed. But the Doctor does reveal that the Toymaker is immortal, and so will return one day. So I guess that softens the blow a little, as this isn't his end. On the simplistic sets, if you recall, the Ark was a very high budget serial, as well as overspent on the serial, causing the Celestial Toymaker to have to make up for it by using mostly, if not entirely, stock props and costumes. With only one episode surviving and a lack of telesnaps of the 3 missing ones, it's hard to say how successfully they got away with this. But the final episode does raise my hopes. The set is fine, but the choice of background does mean that you can occasionally see the crew and cameras in the reflection. So originally I included several sections which discussed the casting and production issues with the script, which gave us multiple characters played by a single actor, and the racist name of the Toymaker. But only a short time after finishing this script, Dalek 6388 released a video where they changed the entire course of history, and by that I mean they uncovered the truth as the Celestial Toymaker. So for years the only one telling the story was Donald Tosh, and as it turns out, by looking back at the old scripts and other documents, it has been revealed that he was not entirely truthful about the development of the script. While there is still truth in these lies, the final script is far closer to what Hales originally had in mind. I'd recommend checking out their video on this, because it's both excellent and there is so much detail in there that I would just be copying them if I wanted to explain all of this. But one important note is that Celestial was used in the racist way rather than the godly way. So I'm going to admit that this isn't a serial I like that much, and out of the missing serials, it's definitely not one I have any desire to see returned. This is partly due to a lack of enjoyment on my part, but also because I think it's a story which will only be worse if it had visuals. Being set in this dimension where anything goes, essentially meaning that as an audio recording, the serial can be a lot more in your mind as you imagine it, but if it existed then we'd be stuck with whatever the production team could cobble up on an even smaller budget than usual. The recovery of the serial is probably to its own detriment. Overall, the serial is iffy. It's not terrible or anything, but it's just a little dull. It's one of those ideas which is far too ambitious for the show, at least at the time. It's also one of those serials which is sandwiched between others I prefer, so it feels like a wait till this is over and I can get back to something I prefer. But after eating some sweets given to Dodo by Cyril, the Doctor collapses in pain. Next time, the Gunfighters.